So, Jo, thank you for inviting me to your office today.
My pleasure, my pleasure. As another
you.
local business here in Chester, it's lovely to see you.
Absolutely. So yeah, we thought we'd just have a conversation about the Renters' Rights Bill and all the changes that are coming our way, and how rent guarantee can perhaps protect landlords. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, what's your thoughts on, I guess, the Renters' Rights Bill in general, but I suppose in particular the banning of Section 21?
I mean, the abolition of Section 21 is obviously a really big deal. It's a very, very big part of what the government wanted to achieve with bringing in renters' rights. But I think it's also important to understand the other parts of renters' rights. Abolition of Section 21, at the end of the day, it removes the so-called no-fault eviction. But there still will be grounds to get your property back in the event that there's a tenancy default.
Yeah.
And in the event that you want to get your property back to sell it or to move back into it. So, you'll still be able to get your house back, I think, is the important thing to remember. But it's inevitably going to take an awful lot longer because of things like increased notice periods. I think the slightly unknown parts of renters' rights are the things like the extra protection for tenants, the fact that, if there are maintenance issues in the property, you're going to have to be paying for those things to be put right and potentially rehousing your tenant and paying that cost as well. So it's about so much more than just abolition of Section 21.
Yeah, I think almost like in the last sort of 20, 30 years, we've almost become accustomed to this no blame, notice, no blush, because I suppose, if a tenant perhaps isn't behaving, but they're not in particular breach of a certain ground, it's like, well, we'll just send them a Section 21 and say the landlord wants the house back.
Yeah, and I think that's a perception in the market, but actually we handle hundreds of rent guarantee claims and legal work every year for our network of letting agents and for private landlords, actually. And generally, when you actually get into the bones of the reason that the Section 21's being relied upon, is because the landlord either wants to move back into their house or because they want to regain possession to sell the property because of, changes in financial circumstances.
Which are all grounds for possession.
Which are all grounds for possession under Section 8, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Something that some landlords can't get their head round is so in the new proposals, you won't be able to serve a Section 8 under ground 8 of Section 8 until the tenant is in 3 months worth of arrears, whereas currently it's 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then when you do serve that notice, then the actual notice period is doubling from 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But court dates, I mean, currently, if a tenant goes into arrears and you serve a Section 8 and they don't go, you're looking at probably 10 months, maybe 12 months to get them out.
Absolutely.
But that's only going to go one way, isn't it?
It's only going to get higher. I mean, at the moment, I guess the thing is with Section 8, we talk a lot about Section 8, and for landlords, it's understanding that if you're serving a Section 8 and you've got historically 2 months worth of rent arrears, now 3 months worth of rent arrears, that gives us the mandatory ground. That means the judge will award possession. The chances of a judge awarding possession on a discretionary ground, so late payment of rent or less than the mandatory 3 months, is the chance of them doing it is so minimal, it's not worth the money to go to court. No. So we're now ending up in a position where a tenant could effectively be 4 months worth of rent arrears before a notice is served, a notice is expired, and then you've got to apply to court. The courts are already in backlog, and it could easily take 6 months before you get a possession hearing. And at that possession hearing, you've then got to make sure you've got your mandatory ground, your possession hearing is not defended, and hope that the judge will give you a possession order. And judges now, they are looking at every minute detail. So you've then got to make sure that your paperwork is absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
You've served all the mandatory documents and you've done everything you need to do come that court date.
Yeah, and I think sort of something that doesn't get talked about enough is obviously all of landlords' costs have gone up, haven't they? Mm-hmm. Maintenance is more expensive. Letting agents are charging slightly higher fees, to cover all of this new compliance.
Absolutely.
So I get, mortgage rates as well. They've gone up through the roof in the last few years. Compared to what they have been.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're a landlord and you can afford to pay your mortgage and pay all your expenditure, perhaps over, for the next 12 months, maybe even longer than that, then I guess you don't need to mitigate that risk, do you?
Well, you don't, David, but let's be realistic. I mean, how many landlords, I'm a landlord, you're a landlord, I don't have a massive pot of money there as the just in case money, right? Most people live to their means. We go to work, you get your rental income, you've got a lot of, expenditure in general, as you say, agents' fees, accountancy fees, maintenance. If the boiler breaks down, that's probably going to cost you a couple of grand, at least, and the upheaval of it all. I think for the very small percentage of landlords who've got that pot of money for 12 months and a pot of money to cover all the maintenance and a pot of money to cover fees and a pot of money to cover the tax bill, good on them.
Yeah.
But for most of us, you have a rental property, it is an investment, and you need that rent to be able to cover the mortgage, to be able to cover licensing fees, to be able to cover, all your other fees. Yeah. Yes, things like your professional fees are all tax deductible, so that's worth remembering. But, if you're not getting that rent, in a very sad state of affairs, we've had situations where a landlord's actually ended up defaulting on their mortgage, and the bank are wanting to repossess the property because the landlord's had no rent.
Yeah, that's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I think that's where it's like any insurance. You never think about the maybe the what if this happens.
Yeah.
And what if my tenant defaulted and it did take 12 months to get them removed from the property?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, it does even now. And that's before renters' rights comes in, increased notice periods, inevitably court backlogs. It could end up taking longer.
Yeah. I mean, where are they going to get all these resources from? Where are they going to get all the judges from? Because we're currently backlogged, it's currently taking a year. So, fast forward to a year's time when renters' rights is in play.
Exactly.
How long is it going to take then? I mean, it could be 18 months.
How long's a piece of string? And we see it. We've got cases now where we've served possession papers on the court in January this year, and we're not getting court hearings through until September this year.
Wow.
And then let's not even get started on the bailiffs, because of course, once you've gone to court, once you've got your possession order, that might expire in 14 days, 28 days. That, again, is dependent on the judge. That's not the end of it all.
No.
I mean, if your tenant does then vacate, great. But if they don't, then you've got to go back to the court, request a bailiff. Then we're in the hands of how long might it take to get a bailiff. That could be another 4, 8, 12, 16 weeks.
Yeah. So what could landlords do to have total peace of mind?
I think there's quite a few things that landlords can do. I think use of a professional letting agent is really, really important from the point of view of, these are people who are professionals in the industry. They're going to be almost pre-vetting the tenants before they even do the viewing with them.
Yeah.
We know there's a massive stock shortage. It's very, very much the landlord's market at the moment because there's so many tenants wanting good quality homes. So your letting agent is going to pre-vet. They're then only going to do viewings with the ones who they know will qualify in principle. They'll then be able to put detailed proposals to you about who could potentially be the most suitable tenant for the property.
Yeah.
And it's, you've got to take into account so many different factors. How long are they looking to rent for? What's their own set of circumstances? So an agent can package all of that up and then help the landlord understand who in principle is going to be the best fit for that property.
Yeah.
The letting agent is also going to be making sure that the tenant's been appropriately referenced.
Yep.
Like, we also see mass increases in tenancy fraud these days.
Yeah.
So we've got, landlords probably don't realise this, but if you're self-referencing, you could easily, as a prospective tenant, go online, buy a set of bank statements and pay slips. And
really?
Few 20, 30 quid. Now, the thing is now, the referencing companies have got pieces of technology that can see that. They can see the edits made on these documents. They can use other pieces of technology to make sure that that tenant is who they say they are, earns what they say they do, and is meeting their credit commitments. So I think that's another big part of it. I think with things like rent guarantee, you know, make sure that you've got something in place that if that rent isn't paid, you know that the rent will still be paid. And with a rent guarantee product, the landlord's going to get the rent. They're also going to get the legal work done for them. You know, so we have a business legal for lettings, which will do all the legal work involved in regaining possession of the property as a result of a tenancy breach, which generally would be rent arrears, but could be expiry of any notice seeking possession whereby the tenant doesn't vacate.
Okay.
So, you know, you've also got scenarios where the tenant might be paying the rent, but the landlord does want the house back to move back into it. Again, serve the notice, wait for that to expire. If the tenant fails to go, we can cover that legal work to recover possession for the landlord. And I think also, as a landlord, ensure that you're appropriately protected with things like your buildings and contents insurance.
Yeah.
So, you know, the other risk is, and sadly it does happen, you know, a tenant will go in and a tenant will damage the property, you know. And if the tenant damages the property, if the landlord's got appropriate cover in place for things like malicious damage, then they could potentially claim on their insurance policy as well if the property is damaged at the end. So instead of it costing potentially tens of thousands of pounds to put right, they're claiming on their insurance and that pays for it.
And is it? I know sort of some landlords, you know, will say to me, "Oh, you know, I can just get a bolt on my current buildings insurance." Is it what would you say would be the advantage of using a specialist company like you for landlords insurance rather than just a bolt on
for rent guarantee?
For rent guarantee,
I mean, look, there are products out there in the market, and they've got various different policy options and things like that. Typically, excuse me, a lot of the bolt-on landlord rent guarantee type products will have things like excesses in place. They might have claims no waiting periods. And I think it's very important that if a landlord was going to buy a bolt-on, that they do go into the detail of reading that policy wording and reading what that policy does and doesn't cover to really understand the value in what they've got. When we go to court, as part of a rent guarantee claim or on a private instruction. There's so many things that we absolutely must do to make sure we get possession. We have really got to dot the I's, cross the T's, you know, and I think there's things in there that a landlord would need to be able to make a successful claim at court that they wouldn't potentially understand. So, you know, not only do you need your tenancy agreement, you need all your mandatory documents, you need your deposit prescribed information, your deposit scheme terms and conditions. You know, you need to make sure everything's been served correctly. Have you served the how to rent guide? You know, and there's all differentials as well based on England and Wales and other territorial areas. So, you know, I think if you've got a letting agent, this is what they're doing day in, day out. If you're taking a bolt on as a private landlord, and it's a bolt-on to things like your buildings insurance, just be really careful that you understand what the claims process is and how you would need to get that claim paid successfully. No,
definitely. So interestingly, one of the questions I was going to ask you is what percentage of your claims are accepted or not accepted, and what, I guess, if anyone's that are rejected, why is that? What are the current, you know, sort of pitfalls that landlords are finding themselves in?
So, I mean, we deal predominantly with letting agents all over the UK, over 6,000. You know, we run a massive book of rent guarantee insurance for those letting agents, and we pay out on 100% of our valid claims. Wow. When I say valid claims, if we have a claim that comes in and the policy was cancelled 6 months ago, obviously we're not going to pay out.
No, of course not.
And whilst I can't comment on exact stats, what we know, you know, as a key member of the insurance industry is if you've got landlords who are claiming directly, they are not necessarily aware of all the mandatory documents that they will need. They won't necessarily have followed the correct processes. They may not have had maintenance done as quickly as they needed to. They may not have served the deposit scheme terms and conditions as part of the prescribed information. So there's lots of little things that landlords won't necessarily have been able to do that could affect the success of a rent guarantee claim. So I would expect the percentage of claims to be a lot lower in terms of their acceptance. I think there'll be other things that a landlord might not have done. They might not have done the inspections when they needed to. Have they got, whilst there might have been a boiler that's broken or some maintenance that's been repaired, has it been correctly documented? Have they got the evidence of that so that they can combat any potential defence when they do get to court? Have they adhered with the terms of the policy? So if the policy says, you must have tenant references in place, which it generally will do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have they used an appropriate referencing company to get those references done? Because those are the things.
Or they just did it themselves, and got a reference off Facebook or,
Because generally that would be a key term in a landlord's policy. You must have had the tenant professionally referenced, and actually what they've done is got a copy of the bank statements and a credit report for them. That straight away is going to be something that is not going to be accepted. I think timescale as well is a big thing. So again, a lot of these policies will state that a claim must be made within a certain time period, and I think for landlords there's a risk that they might miss that. They might try to work with the tenant, which, by the way, is a really good thing.
Absolutely.
But then the tenant does fail, but by that point it's 3 or 4 months down the line, and the insurer could turn around and say, well, I'm sorry, you're out of time for making your claim.
Yeah. I think it's amazing sort of how far things have come in terms of referencing in the last sort of, 10 years. I remember when I was a lettings negotiator, nearly 15 years ago now, it was, back then we obviously did the credit check and, we checked their employer's reference. But like now there's so much tech and AI and integration that you use that just makes that look completely inferior.
I know, back in the day you used to do a quick credit check on them and check they had no CCJs.
Yeah.
Then you used to go, right, they say they're working at Cavendish Rentals, so you give them a call and then you'd ring the landlord and say if they paid the rent, and that was about it. And actually back then, that worked.
Yeah, sure.
But now, there's so much pressure out there in the market. The rents are going up so
people are trying
astronomically.
To find these loopholes
people will doctor their bank statements to make it look like they earn more than they do because they want to look like the best tenant.
Yeah.
But they'll also do it because they want to sublet it and make more money, because they want to turn it into a cannabis farm. Because they want to use it for other illegal purposes, let's just say. And we see a lot of that.
I bet you do.
As a referencing company now, we can see someone's full credit file. We can see their habits and things like that around, what they're spending.
There's so much data, isn't there?
Yeah, I know, the same stuff as like the banks and building societies.
Yeah.
We check things like the age of an email domain that a reference comes from. We can see things like the turnover in the current account, the actual transactions through things like open banking. And that's become more and more important in the current world, because there's also people who will set up an email domain to make it look like that's a legitimate business, to try and give themselves a reference to get into a property. So, you've got to deal with that bit up front. And of course, then if they pass, the agent or the landlord's going to qualify for additional products to protect themselves, like the rent guarantee.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Is there anything, I mean, you've shared some absolute gold, to be honest, so thank you so much. Is there any question perhaps I haven't asked you that I should have asked you perhaps? You've shared so much already.
I mean, I think I can only talk indicative on cost, but if I'm talking about rent guarantee specifically, David, I mean, I would point out that landlords are typically going to be paying their agent around about £1 a day. It's something as a service that's tax deductible. And, to me, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Like, why would you not do it? But I think landlords also need to really look at their rental properties as a business.
Yeah.
You know, look at what's working for them, what's their longer term strategy. Actually, by outsourcing to firms like letting agents, firms like accountants, can they actually potentially look to release more equity? Can they look to actually grow their portfolio?
Absolutely.
You know, we're not talking lots of money for some of these extra bolt-ons, so you know it's definitely worth landlords being encouraged to you know look at what their longer term strategy is going to be.
No, bro. So if you're a landlord watching this perhaps and you don't have rent guarantee and you'd like to perhaps find out more, there'll be a link I'll put on around this video where you can find out some more details. And Jo, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.